Hey guys, it's Lisa and welcome to my channel. Today we're going to make over a few cabinet doors because I got some of these that were unfinished and they've been in my stash for a while and they need to be made over. So I'm going to do 3 on this one. And for the first one, I'm going to add some molds to it. I have my dice clay, whatever it's called. I have that out because that was my first plan. And then I decided that I wanted to just use some of the resin and pour the molds. So that way they would dry quick and they're going to be flat, so I don't have to worry about them not wanting to lay and make contact on my board. So anytime that I'm using something flat and I can do the resin, it is a much quicker way to do it. Now I put the cornstarch in here, and again I decided not to do that, so I didn't even clean this. I just went ahead and poured the resin in it after I shook some of this out. Now when you're using casting resin, you just put one part of of each part. There's an A and B. One is the hardener, and you put one part of each, and you stir it up well, and then you want to get it poured pretty quickly because it will really start to set up. And I actually measured too much here. I actually didn't measure, but I mixed too much, and it hardened before I could get it all poured, because what I wanted to do was take what was left and pour that in other molds, but I wasted some here. Amazing casting resin was the first that I was introduced to by my friend Myra, and I really like the amazing casting resin. But this was cheaper because I could buy it by almost a gallon, and because it's cheaper, I got some breakage. Now I don't know if I didn't add enough hardener in it, because a hardener is what hardens it, obviously. So maybe I didn't use enough since I didn't actually measure. I just kind of eyeballed it. But I'm not going to worry with that. I'm just going to glue these together just like they are. And then once they're dry, I can just take some regular clay and mix the regular air dry clay, and just kind of rub that in those cracks to fill them in. So I'm going to make this work, but I got quite a bit of breakage here. And as you can see here, I'm using Type Bond. That's what I use for my air dry clay, and so that's what I use for this also. And then once this dries well, I'm going to give this whole thing 2 coats of the color Buttercream. And then I'm going to use some rice paper on this to put an image just in that center. And I'm going to try to find that. This is some rice paper that I've had for some time, but I'm going to try to find that and link it in the description, because this is a very pretty rice paper. So this is obviously not going to fit exactly, so I'm going to tear some of the edge off. I could have cut it, but I like that fibrous edge that you get when you tear this. It tears pretty easily, but it's very fibrous, so it just has a real pretty organic edge when you tear it. And then I'm just going to Mod Podge that in the center. If you've never decoupaged with rice paper, you should try it, because it is very good to decoupage with. It lays very smooth. You don't get a lot of bubbles in it, if any, actually. And it's very sturdy to work with. Usually when a paper is real sturdy, it doesn't lay well and it doesn't adhere well. But this is perfect for decoupage. And it is very forgiving, because you can use your brush and work it a lot. And if you do that with with napkins or even with tissue wrap, then you're very likely to tear your image, but not with this. It's a little more pricey, but if you're real careful, then you can find some at a pretty decent price. So again, I decoupaged this in that center area with some Mod Podge. And I'm just taking a sandwich bag here to really press that down well. Now it kind of overlaps here on the side. So what I do is I just take some of that same buttercream color once this dries and just kind of dab it all around the edges. And that will just add that buttercream over some of this dark around the edges, if that makes sense. And I don't think I got that filmed, but I just kind of dabbed it around the edges to kind of blend that together more. And then I put a clear coat on this. Actually, I put the clear coat on before I dabbed that around the edges because I thought I was going to leave it like this at first. And then I decided that I wanted to blend the paint into those edges more. So here I'm giving it a clear coat, and then I'll let that dry well. And then I'm going to take some brown wax and work into that detail and then kind of wipe that off. And if I didn't do this clear coat first before I did that, then I would have too much of that dark to grab into the paint, and it wouldn't be easy to remove if I got too much. But somehow I lost the footage of all that. So again, I just kind of worked that brown wax into the detail and then wiped it off. And there I've dabbed that buttercream around the edges before I did that. So to recap, I did the buttercream and let that dry and put a clear coat over it, let that dry, then did the dabbing around the edges and added some clear coat over that, and then I did my brown wax. But after all those steps, I ended up liking how this turned out. And of course, I'm going to put a hanger on the back of it so that it will hang on the wall. And then the next one, I'm going to make this one more of a farmhouse style. So I'll put a hanger on the back of this one. And I'm going to put a very light coat, not even a full coat, of the color Coffee Bean. And the only reason I'm doing this is because I want a dark underneath. And if I were going to distress down to this, I would want a good full coat so that that I didn't distress down to any of the wood. But because I'm going to do a crackle finish on this, I just need some dark to come through, and I don't need a whole lot. So one not even full coat of this, and then I let that dry, and then I'm going to put a Crackle medium on it. And I use the Crackle medium from Dixie Belle, and if you haven't ever tried that, that is one of their better products. It works really well. So just put your finish underneath that you want to show through your cracks and let it dry well, and then you're just going to brush one coat of the Crackle medium on it. And this is very thick, so you don't need but only one coat. And I like to keep my brush strokes going with the grain of the wood. But one coat of this, and then I let that dry well, and then I'm going to put one heavy coat of the color Buttercream on this. And the reason you only do one coat, and the reason it's a heavy coat, is because once that Crackle medium comes in contact with your paint, it's almost immediately going to start cracking. So if you were to have to put another coat on it, then you're just going to paint over that Crackle finish, and you don't want to do that. So you just put one coat and you just put it thick enough that you don't need two coats. And it doesn't have to be perfect because the brush strokes aren't going to show bad because you're going to have all those cracks as well. And you could use just regular Elmer school glue for this, but then if you let it dry too long, then you're not going to get many cracks at all. If you don't let it dry, you just barely let it dry to the touch, then it will crack also, but not like this Crackle finish does. because with this, you can just watch the cracks happen. You just, if you put a heat gun on it or a blow dryer, then it's very obviously cracks quickly. But if you'll zoom this in, you can see it cracking as just as you apply it. It doesn't even have to completely dry for it to crack. So once I get one full coat on this, and as you can see, it's not a perfect coat, but it's not going to matter. It's still going to, the crackle will still happen, and again, you won't have to worry about those little areas where you can see the dark through, because you're going to see a lot more through with the crackle, and it's just going to completely distract from any cracks that, or any of the wood that's showing through. And then while my paint is drying, then I'm going to turn this burlap sack into a pocket. Now, you wouldn't have to have a burlap sack. You could just use a piece of burlap, because you're going to have this is going to be a wall pocket, and you're going to have a pocket regardless, because of that indentation in the center of your door. But it's kind of redundant here, but I'm just going to have a pocket anyway, just because I already have these little burlap sacks. But I wanted a raw edge on the top, so I just cut that seam off. And then I just kind of fold it down and glue that in place so that the fold stays down. And then I'm going to take a transfer from the set Farm Animals, and that's a Dixie Belle transfer set, and I'm going to transfer this little image of the chicken on the front of this. And you wouldn't think that it would, but this transfers very easily onto this burlap. So now I have my sack ready, and at this point I have let my paint dry and clear coated that already, so that I can put my sack on the front and not have to clear coat around the sack. And I forgot to mention that I took some sandpaper and just distressed around the edges of this. I know I have all this crackle, but I still wanted some distressing around the edge. And now I'm going to glue this sack on with both Titebond and hot glue. Obviously the hot glue for immediate hold, and the Titebond so that it will permanently hold. And as you can see here, now you see what I'm talking about with that pocket. I didn't need a bag here. So you can just use a piece of burlap, and even the raw edge all around the edges would actually look good. You wouldn't have to have this seam. So now I have a pocket, and I'm just going to arrange some flowers down inside it. Now I have taken some polyfill already and just kind of stuffed it down in my sack, so that, because when you're trying to make a pocket out of a sack, you're going to see your stems, the indentions from your stems behind your bag if you don't first stuff it with something. So one way that having a bag here helped is I was able to stuff the bag with the cotton first. Otherwise, you're going to have to glue it on and stuff behind it. So, but again, either way will work. Now, I wanted to work some yellows in here. I put a little white so that I could blend the yellows with my white background. But I wanted some yellows because I want this pocket to work for summer, but I also want it, if it doesn't sell by fall, I wanted it to go well with fall decor. So that's why I used yellows here. I think that sunflowers work really well for fall. That color of yellow, I think, works really well for fall. So once I got my flowers all added, I decided that I wanted to do a little bit of stenciling on this as well. And although I love the sunflowers for fall, I think I end up taking those out and just leaving the daisies. Yes, I do. And then I'll take one of my stencils and just stencil the wording on it. I do this a lot so that my stencils have a multi-purpose. Some of my larger stencils, this one obviously is just a medium one, but I can just use the wording on it. So I know that some of you will know what this word says. I don't really know what it says, but it doesn't really matter. I'm assuming it has something to do with grains, but I think it's going to work well on this. So I just added that to the top, and then I take that little number stencil, and I've got some space there underneath, so I just needed a little something there, so I stenciled that in the area behind the flowers. And I just made a hang tag here with some burlap over white cardstock, and then I stamped the word farm on a book page and antiqued around the edges of that. So that was my hang tag on that one. Now this is my third one, and this one is going to be in more of a landscape style, and I'm going to put a hanger on the back of this one as well, but I'll do it where it hangs in the landscape style like this. Now I'm using the color French Linen, and that's a Dixie Belle color. It's more of a gray color, and I thought this was the color that I wanted, but I end up changing this. But I give this 2 coats of the color French Linen, and then I'm going to do, I actually did that in the center as well, but then I decided I wanted to do some decoupage on it. So I end up painting the center of this in the color Buttercream before I do my decoupage. So here I am just very carefully painting over that. And then this is a napkin that I purchased from the Walmart website. And I'm going to decoupage that on the center part of this. And I know I didn't trim out neatly next to the French Linen color, but it doesn't matter. That just kind of gives the edges a little bit darker look, and I was fine with that. But here I am decoupaging that on. And because I had to, it wasn't wide enough for the whole area, I end up having to piece it. So this is a design that I can continue the design onto the next piece. So it worked out fine, except that you can somewhat see the seam. But what I do to distract from that little seam is I'm going to be putting some wall hooks on this and use this as like a coat rack of sorts. So I'm going to put 2 hooks on here. So I'll just put one of the hooks over that seam and then line the other one up at the same distance from the edge, if that makes sense. But what I did to change the color of that gray, I just didn't like the gray with this at all. So what I did was I went ahead and put a coat of the Crackle medium on this, and then I'll put the Buttercream over the top of this French Linen color, and you'll get just a hint of that gray showing through, which this napkin has a little bit of the gray in it, so I wanted some of that gray. So that was the perfect solution, was just to put this Crackle medium on and go over this with Buttercream, and I ended up getting the finish that I liked. And then I had some black cast iron wall hooks that I sell in my store, so I painted those in the color Buttercream and did a little bit of distressing on those, and then I'll add these to my wall board, or I'll add them to my cabinet door. Again, I want to make sure that one of them covers that seam, and then I measure the other side the same distance from the edge. So I hot glued those in place to hold them where they needed to be until I put my screws in it. And then I just dabbed a little bit of the paint over my screws. There's so many things that you can do with cabinet doors, and they're just a really good base to work with. And I don't remember where I found them, but I found several of these unfinished cabinet doors which were perfect. And I just had a big stack of those and decided to start pulling them out today. So don't be surprised if you see some more videos with these cabinet doors. Again, I wanted to add some script to this and some wording. So I'm just using part of another stencil that I had and adding some wording to the top. And I think I add a little bit to the bottom, and then I did some, just a little design in each corner from another stencil to dress that up. And then obviously I'll put a clear coat over all of it, and this will be finished. But I really like how that turned out. It has a really pretty French country look. And each of these got a hang tag, as you can see. I used some of that same napkin and glued it over some cardstock that I had stamped with some script. And I made a hang tag for the lavender one. It's not in this picture, but I did add one to that as well. So now what I want to do, and I'm going to do this in most of my videos for a little while, just like I did with Christmas last year, I'm going to add a fall project at the end of each video, or at the end of most videos. And I'm going to start with some different styles of pumpkins. So this one is going to be a pumpkin made from a sack. And there is that hang tag that I was talking about that I added to that one. But I'm going to start with just a regular muslin bag, and I'm using a thicker muslin bag, and I ordered these from Amazon last year, and I've been looking for them this year and haven't been able to find them. If I manage to find them, I will link that in the description. But there are different bags on there. I just wasn't sure that it was the one that I had ordered, and I really like these because they're thicker. I ended up getting some larger ones last year that were, when I got them, it turns out they were very thin, and I didn't care for those. So I want to be real careful when I add more that I don't end up with really thin ones. But as you can see, I'm adding enough polyfill here. You can use polyfill or an old pillow that you take the stuffings from. I do that a lot. And I'm just filling it up enough to have the shape of a pumpkin here. And then I went outside looking for a stick that was the right thickness to use as a stem on this. And I looked up, somehow I found a little piece of driftwood. I don't even know where it came from, but it was perfect for a stem. So to attach this, I'm just going to add some hot glue to the end of this and just stick it down in my sack, and then tie that drawstring tightly around the top, and that will hold that stem in place and make my pumpkin. So this is a very, very simple way to make a pumpkin. And if you don't have the driftwood, obviously you can just use a stick. I find most of my pumpkin stems just looking out in the yard, and but I want this. I don't want this to be a white pumpkin. I want to paint this one, and so I'm using the color terracotta, and that's a Dixie Belle color, and I just kind of haphazardly brush that on. And the only thing is, I don't worry about complete full coverage on this, but I am going to make sure that I keep my strokes in the same direction. And because this paint will change the texture of your cloth, I'll be able to make some pumpkins with my thinner ones also. I just prefer this thicker weight bag. But I like the texture that the paint gives the cloth. So here in the top, obviously I'm not able to keep my strokes in the same direction. I'm just trying to get down in those creases as much as I can. Again, I don't worry about covering it completely because that haphazard painting that you get with this just gives it more of a primitive look. But I just kind of brush that, and this is just a very cheap old brush that I'm using. And again, I'm just going to keep those strokes going vertical together. Now, I like using this terracotta because I feel like it's a good pumpkin color. I don't like using a bright orange at all, and it's very hard to get an orange that is not so bold. And a lot of people like that, but I want more of a muted look. Even actually more muted than this terracotta is. So once I get this covered with the terracotta, then I'm going to take some buttercream and kind of dry brush over the top of it, still keeping my strokes in the same direction, and just add a little bit more dimension to the color. And I'm using very little of this buttercream here. I just want to add some dimension in that color and a little bit of highlighting, I guess. And this just kind of gives this more of a primitive look. And then I'm going to take another step with it, and I'm going to take, once this is dry, then I'm going to take some of my antiquing ink and add some shading to this. And don't worry about when you get a little heavy-handed like I did on the white there, because you can always take some orange and go back over it. But it's dry at this point, so I'm going over it with some of the antiquing ink. Now, I didn't get as much of the color as I wanted on here. It didn't show up as much as I wanted. So I put some fresh ink on my pad and just added quite a bit more color. So once I put the ink in the pad, I didn't let it soak in completely so that I would have plenty on my sponge, and added it that way. And as you can see, that added quite a bit of shading, and then I was able to create the illusion of the little sections of the pumpkin. And so I liked using a lot more of the ink here. Now, I'm not going to worry with clear coating this because it's just going to be a bag pumpkin, and so I don't feel like it needs that clear coat protection. And I don't think that the this chalky look of the paint is not going to bother me at all on this. And I think that since this is such a primitive look, it's going to call for a very simple tag. I think that when you're doing a primitive project, the way that you keep it looking more primitive is to keep everything very simple. And again, like I said, including the tag. So I just tore out a shape with my cardstock here and antiqued heavily around the edges, since that ink pad had plenty of ink on it, and then antiqued heavily around my image and glued that on and kept it very, very simple. And I wanted to add just a little bit of greenery to the top of this, and it's really hard to find greenery that works for pumpkins. But I don't think most people think much about what type of leaves come on a pumpkin, so I think that any primitive looking greenery will work. And this has the wire on it, so I just kind of wrapped it around and twisted it and gave it just a little bit of greenery. And then to add even more of a primitive look to it, I just cut a piece of cheesecloth that I had coffee stained and tied that around the top. So then I just added my hang tag, and that's all that I did to this. So this is actually my very first pumpkin that I've made this year, but again, I'm going to have to start getting busy with my fall projects, so expect to see more. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I hope to see you in the next. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great evening, and God bless you and your family.